has largely been to push forward and advance the administration's policies and that are largely set by President Biden. And so she's traveled to the Indo-Pacific. She's meeting with foreign leaders on issues like Ukraine and trying to advance the mission in terms of keeping U.S. alliances together and things like that. But she hasn't really stepped out on her own. And one official said, it's less debating in the Situation Room and more helping execute the play. Now, when you look at what she's said, one of the areas where people think she differs than President Biden is on Israel. And a lot of that is just a difference in tone and emphasis, not necessarily on policy. If you look at what she said on Israel and the war in Gaza, it's pretty much the same as what President Biden has said, except she emphasizes things differently. She really focuses on the humanitarian crisis there, and her tone is different. She's far more impassioned, and that's left the impression that she would be tougher on Israel. And yet at the same time, she said that the U.S. and agrees with the president that the U.S. would have an ironclad commitment to Israel's security. So it's a bit of a murky picture. There's a lot of unanswered questions in terms of very specific challenges that she could face, how she would handle them if China were to invade on Taiwan, for instance, or how she would handle things like Iran. At the same time, the expectation is there would be a lot of continuity there.
The important report is online now at NBCNews.com. NBC News Washington Managing Editor Carol Lee. Carol, thank you. So the renewed enthusiasm among Democratic voters appears to have, at least for now, justified the decisions of lawmakers who called on President Joe Biden to exit the 2024 race after his tough performance in last month's debate in Atlanta. Among them, Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado, who was the first Democratic member of the upper chamber to say Biden should step aside over concerns that Trump would win November's election in, as he put it, a landslide. And Senator Bennet joins us now. He is a member of the Intelligence Committee. Senator, thanks so much for being with us. Let's get your thoughts. As we just noted, you were out there at the forefront of saying, thanking President Biden for his service, but saying it was time for him to step aside. That has now happened. We have seen how the race has changed. Give us your thoughts about the last couple of weeks.
I'd say a couple of things. One is, as I was having those conversations with representatives from the White House, I was saying to them, we are asking President Biden to make a decision that no other American has ever made. To walk away from the White House with that kind of sacrifice is very unusual in American history. And once again, Joe Biden made the right decision for the United States of America, put his own political interests first. The question for us now is, what are we going to do over the next 4 months to honor that sacrifice, to make sure Kamala Harris is elected president of the United States and that Donald Trump is put out to pasture? And we have to do it because this country needs to begin to restore an economy that when it grows for everybody, not just the people at the very top. Donald Trump is the worst example of trickle-down economics we could have. And the next generation of Americans are deeply worried that they're going to be the first generation that has less opportunity, not more, than their parents and grandparents. Kamala Harris supports things like the child tax credit that have been really good for working people. So I think we've got only 4 months here to win. We've got to say to Joe Biden, thank you for what you did for this country. And now we got to go and we got to win this election, put Donald Trump behind us, and create an economy that when it grows for everyone. That's what we have to do.
So speaking of that tax credit, Republican Vice Presidential nominee J.D. Vance continues to defend himself from the backlash surrounding comments he made in 2021 about the country being run by childless cat ladies who have no stake in America's future. That's what he said. In a statement yesterday, a Vance spokesperson once again insisted that the senator was only referring to Democratic lawmakers who support, quote, anti-child and anti-family policies. But tomorrow, it's likely that Republicans will be the ones who could be seen as standing in the way of helping families. That's when Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is planning to hold a procedural vote on a bill to expand the child tax credit for low-income families. That expansion was included in the 2021 American Rescue Plan and led to a decrease in the child poverty rate. But when it expired a year later, Republicans prevented it from being reauthorized. Many of those same Republicans have already signaled their opposition to advancing tomorrow's bill meaning it is unlikely to get the 60 votes needed to break a filibuster. So, Senator Bennet, let's get your thoughts on that and what appears to be a real act of hypocrisy from your Republican colleague from Ohio.
Well, his statements they're idiotic. Even if you accept his explanation for them, they're idiotic. But any American can listen to what he said and know what he means and why he's saying it. And with respect to the child tax credit, Kamala Harris was one of the very first people to endorse that credit and to work for that credit that cut childhood poverty in half. Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Sherrod Brown, and I were the people that developed that. Joe Biden is the one, with Kamala Harris as his vice president, who cut childhood poverty in half and allowed America to see for the first time that we don't have to accept our incredibly high level of childhood poverty as a permanent feature of our democracy or a permanent feature of our economy. J.D. Vance has been nowhere on that. In fact, the only thing he's for is Donald Trump's tax cuts, extending Donald's tax cuts for rich people. He went home to Mar-a-Lago to say you're welcome to the people whose taxes he had cut. We're sitting there in their tuxedos. 65% of the benefit of that tax cut goes to the top 5% of Americans, whereas the child tax credit that Kamala Harris has fought for goes to 90% of America's children and cuts our child poverty almost in half. That is a perfect illustration of the stakes that are in this election and why it is so important for us to fight as hard as we can over the next 4 months to make sure she wins.
Talking about the next election and why the people need to come out and vote. When you talk about the child tax credit, we talk about the infrastructure bill, we talk about inflation reduction, many of the things that was done over the last 3.5 years by President Biden and Vice President Harris. They are concrete things, the child tax credit also among them, that really fundamentally changed the course of the country back on course with where it was. And spending some time the day before yesterday with the president, going to Texas and on, I sense that he is more energetic about preserving his legacy by electing Vice President Harris and electing Democrats. How important is it, Senator Bennet, for people to understand that there were some achievements made, I think some great achievements, but they could be eroded or reversed if we don't see a continuation of a Democratic president, in this case, Kamala Harris, the vice president. We are going to see a rollback, and all of the progress that was made is going to be wiped away.
Reverend Sharpton, first of all, it is great to hear your voice. It's great to hear Chris Matthews' voice as well this morning. I think it's so important. You know better than anybody else the whirlwind that we're reaping now because of the trickle-down economics that Ronald Reagan started when he was president. That trickle-down, that supply side that unfortunately went through not just Republican presidents, but Democratic presidents as well, has created some of the worst inequality in the industrialized world here in the United States, some of the worst wealth inequality as well. You know, our kids and grandkids are the first kids in America who are going to see less opportunity than their parents and grandparents if we don't turn things around. And Joe Biden and Kamala Harris began that process with that infrastructure bill by bringing back the first industry to the United States of America since Ronald Reagan exported everything to Southeast Asia and to China, by for the first time requiring Medicare to negotiate drug prices on behalf of the American people, overcoming the pharmaceutical lobby to do it. Those things had never been done before. That is an important, hugely important step forward. We don't want it to be rolled back, but we also need to recognize that in our economy today, as opposed to when Reagan was president in 1980, the bottom 50% of Americans actually have less wealth today than in 1980 when Reagan was president, and that's because of the trickle-down economics that mostly Republicans have been responsible for. Joe Biden has been the one trying to change that, and going into the future, we have to change it because you want to know what a threat to our democracy is? It's not Donald Trump. He's a symptom of our problems. He's a symptom of the lack of economic mobility that we have. We have to restore that economic mobility to the United States to save our democracy. And it is clear to me that Kamala Harris understands that that is the task in front of us. So the stuff that they've accomplished as the Biden administration, incredibly important, shows the distinction between the two parties. Now we have to show the American people in Pennsylvania and the other states that you've been talking about this morning about what Kamala Harris's vision for the future is and how it differs from Donald Trump's trickle down that benefits the people at Mar-a-Lago but doesn't benefit anybody else, especially the school kids I used to work for in the Denver public schools.
All right. Democratic Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.